You find yourself taken in by the gruesome, the scary, the real aspects of suffering as long as they feel unreal, at least in the moments during which you can say to yourself with a whisper, "Hey, at least it wasn't me." Deny it all you like, but know that we all feel a primal draw towards morbid subject matter, even if we avert our eyes and ears and establish a solid base of morality. 2014's Nightcrawler knows this all too well, and in protagonist Lou Bloom, we see not ourselves, not an everyman character, but a tool to peel back the layers of our daily lives and reveal the professional and social value we place on violence. To understand the meaning of the film, we must first interpret the motivations and worldview of protagonist Lou Bloom. Within the special features on physical copies of the movie, Nightcrawler writer and director Dan Gilroy reveals his intentions towards writing Lou as they relate to the character's starting point during the beginning of the film, stating that, quote, "Lou's character came from the awareness that I have that a lot of people under 30, tens of millions of people, I think, statistically either can't find employment or find employment that's piecemeal, and they can't really sustain themselves. And I was very intrigued with the idea of a character coming out of that desperation and he finds his calling." End quote. By identifying desperation as being one of Lou's primary qualities, Gilroy confirms its role behind his attempts to persuade the worker to hire him for a full-time position at the beginning of the film, after he unsuccessfully negotiates additional pay for the materials he stole. Yet, even with the element of desperation present, the audience can only theorize at this point what the desperation is for, and while it may be tempting to assume that Lou's main struggle lies in paying his rent, the luxury watch he steals in the film's opening scene offers an important contradiction to this theory. Bloom does not sell the watch to a pawn shop for cash to give to his landlord, and instead wears it throughout the film, and with this we can surmise that either the object of Bloom's desperation is something other than money, perhaps being abstract rather than material, or that a pursuit of cash is the driving force behind his motivations during the film's beginning scenes, but is not all-consuming. Both possibilities allow for more complex workings than a simple need to get by within Bloom's mind and, by extension, his actions. During the same special feature, actor Jake Gyllenhaal makes a brief statement on his character's background and further interprets his primary motivation, saying, quote, "I think that Lou Bloom is the product of his generation and culture in general. He was brought up totally on the internet. His interaction with people had been limited, and as a result I think he's sort of apathetic to feelings. He's the product of the idea of capitalism, which is success at any cost, and that's something that he believes in deeply and that he follows to the end." End quote. While his explanation for why Lou Bloom has his particular disposition towards other people is an assumption, as far as we know, Gyllenhaal's identification of success as an important factor for Lou is reasonable. The character is open with both the audience and other characters that he is pursuing a progression of professional power via his own company, subordinates, and higher paychecks for additional video submissions. We can then acknowledge success as being the object of Bloom's desperation, and since we have already established that money is not the most important reward for this character, we must examine the other benefits for which Bloom negotiates in order to determine what exactly he is seeking. During his dinner with Nina, he says a line that, if one takes it at face value and ignores the context of the scene, makes him seem almost sympathetic. He says, quote, "There's certain good things about being alone. You have time to do the things you want to do, like study and plan, but you can't have dinners like this or be physical with a person. I mean, outside of flirtationship." End quote. By itself, this line seems to indicate that Lou Bloom is lonely and desires intimacy, and maybe, by extension, that his disconnect with other people is due at least in part to an inability to relate to them. In fact, Rick later indicates having made this assumption about Bloom, telling him that, quote, "You don't fucking understand people," end quote. One of the problems with attributing loneliness and/or difficulties relating to other people as a driving force behind his actions, however, is that he himself denies that charge when he asks Rick, quote, "What if my problem wasn't that I don't understand people, but that I don't like them?" End quote. If we consider his actions prior to this point in the film, such as the ease at which he captures his footage of crime scene victims, his tampering with the brakes of the other crew's van, and his blackmailing of Nina to confirm the truth in his statement, among other deeds, we can accept his statement as true. If a need for intimacy and an inability to relate to other people does not factor into the dinner conversation he has with Nina, then his coercion of her into having sex with him for job security cannot include a twisted, yet genuine desire to connect with her on a personal level. To state this is important, because we can then better interpret the reason he propositions her in the first place. If we list the elements of sex that make it appealing, but remove emotional intimacy, closeness, and procreation from it, the most obvious remaining appeals are physical attraction, pleasure, and power dynamics. The first two are possible, as Lou seeing Nina's body as physically attractive and useful for stimulation does not contradict his dislike for other people, yet they are unlikely to be the only factors considering that we know Lou is desperate for success. He would not risk his growing influence at the news station just to smash his hot older boss. We can then identify the last remaining appeal of sex, power over another person or people, as being his primary desire when he coerces Nina and the element of success for which he is most desperate. This becomes even more clear when we consider his professional relationship with Rick. During their initial meeting and interview, it doesn't appear at first to be working out in Rick's favor. He confesses to having spotty work experience and to not having very many marketable skills aside from knowing the city's routes. Bloom hires him anyway, and the exchange gives us the impression that Lou is hiring Rick for his navigational sense and perhaps the opportunity to pay less money for a less experienced worker that could then prove himself and get better at the job. Another factor in Rick's interview that you may have considered as appealing to Lou is his admission that he is homeless, alone, and, quote, needs a job, end quote, to the extent that he will, quote, do pretty much anything, end quote. One might interpret this as the true draw towards hiring Rick, as his desperation for money might signal that he would be easier to coerce into difficult moral positions. Rick does not do well, in fact, at the navigating that he claimed to excel at, or rather performing it under pressure whenever we see him try to do his job, which begs an important question. Why doesn't Bloom fire Rick? This question is especially loud when we see Lou's intense display of anger in his bathroom after the other night-crawling team gets to the accident first, because Rick had failed to tell him to turn sooner. One might argue that finding a new intern would pose too much of a time sink at a point when Bloom is focusing all of his efforts on doing better than his competition, so that he can keep working as a contractor for the news studio, and thus all he can do is cross his fingers and hope that Rick does better. Fine. This is a difficult argument to disprove, but it doesn't help explain why Bloom later offers him a promotion, in spite of his mistakes, because to do so implies that he is probably not considering firing him the first chance he gets. Lou wants Rick to stay, and in considering why, we can think back to what the promotion immediately precedes. Bloom asks Rick to help him tail the murderers and put himself in harm's way, as well as more actively participate in creating dangerous situations for the larger public. Though the promotion is to get Rick more eager to comply with this plan, with Lou well aware of his need for money, it also comes in response to Rick pleading for more pay each night despite not doing his job properly. Such a demand in light of poor job performance would likely infuriate Bloom, as it might the average employer, unless Lou were already planning on increasing his pay in exchange for putting him in more dangerous, morally questionable positions. What Bloom doesn't account for, however, is the possibility that Rick would object to the job being asked of him, which he does, calling it, quote, some seriously messed up shit, end quote. Why would Lou assume that Rick would not take issue with putting himself in harm's way? given that he claims to understand people. Regarding Rick, Lou only knows that he is homeless, needs money perhaps more than a typical employee, and knows how to navigate the city but isn't focused enough to do so properly. We can reasonably connect Lou's knowledge that Rick is in desperate need for money and has no safety net to the boldness with which he asks Rick to help tell the murderers. Proof that Lou expected Rick to go along with his plan lies in his reaction to his employees' objections. The moment that Rick raises issues with the plan and blackmails Bloom into giving him more money for the job, Bloom falls silent for several moments, his lower lip trembling in barely controlled anger before he concedes. An immediate, non-emotional response to the blackmail would have shown that Lou had accounted for this possibility, but Rick's blackmailing of Lou allows him a piece of leverage that he hadn't expected, and presents a loss of the power that he thought he had over his employee. In response to this loss of control, Bloom's interactions with Rick become more straightforward and threatening, and when he tells him, quote, "I'm just gonna have to give it to you," end quote, the audience gets a hint that the loss of power over his employee is enough for Lou to have started planning to get rid of him in some way, even though the quote is referring to Rick's demands for more pay. For Bloom, an employee who is not able to do their job is tolerable, even acceptable, whereas an employee who takes power away from him, their boss, presents a serious enough problem to warrant getting rid of him in a more permanent manner. A strong piece of evidence that power over others is the main element of a success for which Lou Bloom is desperate lies in his willingness to get his employee killed to keep it. Lou Bloom's main objective throughout Nightcrawler is to obtain and sustain the power over others that success promises. If we dig deeper on Lou Bloom's character, we can start to explore the notable absence of a more casual social life for him in the form of friends, community, family, etc., and use it to define an important element of his worldview and, by extension, his actions. We get the sense that Bloom is somewhat solitary early on in the film, during shots of his apartment interior, where the TV occupies the center and Bloom remains in the corner as if he's part of the furnishings. And when he's about to meet Rick in the diner, with the camera across the room settling on him, waiting alone, just long enough for it to make an impression on us. We hear it when he forces an awkward chuckle to mimic the laughter coming from his television as he irons. We sense it when he rushes in to get point-blank shots of crime victims with little hesitation, while authorities scold him to leave early on in his night-crawling career. What then do these frames and Lou's separation from other people early on mean within the broader context of the film? They establish a bit of evidence for a peculiar detail regarding Bloom's psyche. He seems to view the world around him as almost fictional, with one-dimensional characters that respond in predictable manner to persuasion and fake laughter, a lack of need for the casual conversations that would fail to advance the narrative, or, in other words, make him wait longer to see the ending he desires to see, and crimes and tragedies that, as soon as their scenes end, don't carry any real-world significance. His eyes also remain wide open throughout most of the movie, as if he himself is the video camera, scanning and studying his surroundings with interest, aside from when the detective confronts him about watching his employee die, at which point they shutter closed for a few moments before returning to their original state after she leaves. Additional layers of evidence for Nightcrawler's fictionalization of its own universe lie in its environments and visuals. There are multiple shots in which unnatural computer lighting provides a focal point for the audience, shadowing the surroundings. This includes the main room of the television station, where multiple monitors glow with different images, including advertising, and provide the control hub for Nina, Lou, and other relevant workers to control the information and imaging they release to the public. It includes the shot of Bloom's television screen in the early part of the film as the camera jumps forward and the lit screen starts to swallow the viewer's awareness of the rest of the scene. The news now on full display. On their own, these shots may not appear to indicate anything, but they almost seem to influence the rest of the film, lending a layer of artificiality to scenes that we assume should appear more organic. When we join Lou and Rick in their efforts to get to each crime scene, we see neon traffic lights blur, an admonishing "focus" in big letters on a billboard right after Lou scolds Rick for not doing so, as if their own thoughts are influencing their surrounding. We see multiple scenes and moments swim in a garish green that doesn't itself feel organic. We see it in the window right above his television set, before it jumps into the news, prior to his interest in night crawling. We see unnaturally green walls behind Bloom as he enters the main room of the news station to give Nina the first tape, and lining the walls behind Bloom again when he breaches the restricted area of a crime scene for the first time to tamper with the area for better shots. We see it all over his bathroom when his failure to arrive before the other crew drives him to extreme rage, before he cuts their brake lines. We see it appear as a cloud between the crashing cars in the film's final act as he zooms between them and parks, just before he leads Rick to his death. We even see Nina ingest it in the form of a margarita with lime in the same scene that Lou coerces her into a sexual relationship. The margarita itself acting as the camera's focus for several seconds before the scene even begins. The use of a natural green in these scenes reflects the permissions that an average traffic light would grant. A go-ahead. But in these contexts, the permissions are for Lou to push a new boundary, and just as the manufactured nature of television media branches out into the rest of Nightcrawler's setting, the lack of strong emotional displays throughout most of the movie indicates that it has spread to the characters themselves. Most, if not all, of the side characters remain rather monotone in their interactions with Bloom and the rest of the world, aside from the occasional display of irritation. The newscasters express shock at Bloom's gruesome shot of the victims in the mansion only after Nina tells them to. Nina stifles any disgust or fear she feels toward Lou after the dinner scene and deals with him as she would any other co-worker. Nowhere is this more clear, however, than in the scene where Rick passes away. As Rick lies on the ground and Bloom approaches, his reaction is one of mild accusation, confirming that Lou tricked him rather than, say, expressing a strong sense of hate towards Lou in an emotional outburst, or showing that he is anxious of his impending death. You might be thinking of a slick counter-argument in the form of Bloom screaming at the mirror, but this in no way invalidates anything. The story follows Bloom, and in appearing to abide by the rules of his psyche with set design and somewhat robotic characters that respond to his decisions and thoughts, allows him to display his emotions because he sees himself as real. By showcasing Lou Bloom's personality and worldview in the way that it does, that of a man watching a movie, one which he can manipulate to get the end he wants, Nightcrawler interprets the nature of antisocial personality disorder. While I am not a psychologist, its description on clevelandclinic.org reasonably fits with Lou Bloom's actions. It describes antisocial personality disorder as having a tendency to, quote, manipulate or deceive people, exploit or take advantage of someone else for your own benefit, disregard the law or rights of other people, and feel no remorse for your actions, end quote. Bloom manipulates and exploits Rick by putting him in danger for little pay, knowing he needs the money and is otherwise unemployable, and he does the same with Nina, positioning himself to hold power over her for sexual and social favors. We know he cares little for the law as early as the beginning of the movie, when he is stealing metal from a chain-link fence and assaults the security guard who investigates. One might claim that he feels remorse for letting Rick die when he averts his eyes from the detective near the end of the film, but this is not a guarantee of remorse, and moments later he is back to his charming, talkative self. So how does this film's interpretation of antisocial personality disorder connect with its depiction of Lou as a participant in his own private film viewing? Well, it helps explain why he doesn't flinch when the murderer looks at him near the end of the film, why he is bold enough to manipulate Nina into entering a sexual relationship with him, why his facade doesn't break during his interrogation. The film Lou is watching cannot punish him for anything, and if it starts to get too close to breaking the glass barrier, he can simply close the shutters of his eyes and move to the next scene. Lou Bloom is in control of the remote. One more piece of evidence for Lou Bloom acting more as an audience member than a protagonist that I want to bring your attention to, and one which segues into an important revelation about the film itself, is that he does not change throughout the movie. We already know from the opening scene that he is shady. We know from his sales skills of selling the bike he stole that he has charisma and lies with ease. And we know from him stealing the watch that he covets, to some degree, luxury items. After these scenes, his manipulation of the people around him into positions of power, his willingness to tamper with crime scenes, and his purchase of the muscle car as a status symbol come as no surprise. They are not novel developments for the character. Instead, the character that does change throughout the film is the world around Lou Bloom. Like the stoplights that oversee him as he rushes to each crime scene and that branch out into two different paths for his crew's vans to drive down at the end of the film, the environment around Lou Bloom turns from red to green, from dead to living, as he continues to indulge in his depravity. The worker at the beginning knows he is a thief and won't hire him, and the authorities at his first crime scenes kick him out long before he can get the shots he wants. But by the end of the film, the authorities do not indict him. He has a more free, dominant reign over his career in the city than before. The television news airs all of his increasingly graphic shots, and Nina even expresses admiration towards him. So, if Lou has the same personality and worldview throughout the film, why is he able to garner so much power and success after switching his career to night crawling? Well, his scavenging job and his night crawling job share the element of blatant illegality, at least after Bloom enters his first restricted area to get a better shot. But the key difference between them is that the latter exploits other people's suffering. Lou Bloom is able to not only succeed, but thrive in the world of Nightcrawler because his exploitation of other people's suffering, depicting each victim on their worst day in graphic detail, provides more value to the people around him and those who watch his recordings on the news, the general public, in other words, than the petty thievery he commits at the beginning or the honest work of the nameless station crew members. Nightcrawler was never about Lou Bloom himself, nor was it a deep exploration of the nature of antisocial personality disorder, but rather about us as viewers and as people. We watch while noticing the encouragement of the world around him as Lou Bloom goes further and further and receives the power over others and social status which he craves and covets. Bloom and his psyche are tools that both showcase a dark fascination within each of us towards the morbid and gruesome, and illustrate that the news industry, and perhaps the larger professional world in general, offers significant rewards for exploiting other people's suffering. And that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons to show your support. Let me know what you think about this analysis in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.